So I actually wrote this right after I did my Obi-Wan video, so I'm not entirely sure how the ratings of that went, but I really like the idea of this, so I think no matter what, I'll just continue with it. So in this episode, I'm going to go over my pitch for the recently announced Bad Batch Clone Wars spinoff. Also, I just want to get this out of the way, because some people think that the Bad Batch arc was made solely for a Disney Plus spinoff, and that somehow ruined the last season. I don't think some people know that this was already basically made before the show was going to Disney Plus. This arc was originally going to air on Cartoon Network, and the Bad Batch were going to be recurring characters, and we even see a pre-rendered version on YouTube of the Bad Batch on Kashyyyk with Yoda. So without further ado, let's just get into my pitch for the Bad Batch series. So the general premise is basically going to be about these 5 clones dealing with the immediate aftermath of the Clone Wars. I'm not entirely sure why there's been nothing about this. This is 100%, in my opinion, the most intense period of Star Wars, where we have an up-and-coming fresh Darth Vader utilizing highly trained clone troopers to dispose of the remaining Jedi. There's just complete and utter chaos, darkness, and confusion in the galaxy, and there's no safe place to go. There will be a lot of scenarios where the Bad Batch are forced to kill their beloved brothers, and there will be a constant state of urgency in getting to the bottom of what's happening. It'll kind of be like a mystery thriller for these types of clones because they won't really know what's happening around themselves. I think a clone's perspective of Order 66 immediately after is one of the most interesting stories you can tell. Everything that they once held dear is completely ripped from them, and they have no idea as to why. The story will basically follow the Bad Batch in a series of adventures on what clone life looks like when they have no actual purpose. There will be some philosophical takes about what it means to be living in a world that doesn't necessarily need you, but it will also be naturally fun. We see here that the Bad Batch are a bunch of dysfunctional hotheads, so naturally there will be a lot of comedy, hence a nice balance to appease children and adults for Star Wars. Next up is the tone. The tone will be a mix of fun comedy and deep darkness. The most similar thing I can put it to is the Bad Batch arc itself in the Clone Wars, mixed in with the arc of Umbara in the Clone Wars. This is so obviously because the Bad Batch were featured there, and there's some nice banter between all of them as there's just so many clashing personalities. And the Umbara one because there's a lot of question of existence of being a clone, and there's just a lot more intense action scenes in that arc, and I think that will mesh really well into the Bad Batch. A main character I would probably focus more on is the character of Echo, as I think people can latch onto that person the most. He was my most favorite clone as a kid, and I think he could probably be the most connective tissue because he was in like the 5th episode of the Clone Wars ever made, and it'd be a nice natural progression for the character. He's the last one of his squad, he's so screwed up, and he just needs a place of belonging. I think the pilot should naturally be a bit of a mix and of tones, and maybe some parts in the middle can be a little more lighthearted, and as the season comes to a close, it naturally gets more mature and darker. The show will tackle themes of alienation as we have clones who, even before Order 66, were outcasts. They naturally feel like they don't belong, but that's okay. They seem to be doing very good for themselves, and it'll show the lessons that it's okay to be different in a world that doesn't necessarily understand you. But now that feeling is enhanced since they truly are one of a kind, since the entire Republic is against them. They'll face feelings of oppression from the general public because no one likes the clones, they're ruining everything, and they aren't accepted in the clone army anyway, so no matter who they turn to, no one's going to be helping them, and it's just going to be a complete feeling of like no one needs or wants you, so what do you do with your life? Another theme will be in the vein of a nice brotherly family dynamic where at times they can't stand each other and they just have to learn to accept one another to get through their times. It's going to get pretty deep at times, but just like Clone Wars, it's going to have a consistent bit of humor, and yeah, that's about it. Lastly, the general outline of the series. This will be a 12-episode series with 4 episodic arcs So similar to Clone Wars, but after an arc finishes, it builds off of it immediately instead of just completely starting over with a new story. Again, this is going to be a linear story, strictly following the Bad Batch, but there will be more contained stories in these 4 episodic arcs. I really like this format. I think it's a really nice way of telling cohesive stories, and they'll be like mini movies since each episode will be roughly 20 minutes long, and they'll release on a weekly basis. So each arc will propel the story forward and will have lasting consequences, but for the most part, it'll be its own thing like Clone Wars. So the way I think the story's first 4 episodes should open up is actually to be set in the Clone Wars era and reuse the Kashyyyk storyline. I know that may sound weird, but there will be a huge chunk of the audience watching this that haven't even seen the Clone Wars. I know a lot of people that watch The Mandalorian but not Clone Wars, since Clone Wars is already this pre-established thing that they don't want to get into. A new Star Wars series starting from scratch will naturally attract more viewers. So I think reusing the Kashyyyk storyline will appease people who really wanted to see that story adapted, and it'll serve as a nice basis of familiarizing the audience with the Bad Batch's dynamic. Also, it would directly parallel the pilot of the Clone Wars, where we have a self-doubting group of clones learning from Yoda, so I think that would be a nice way of nodding to that series and moving on to something new. Yoda, of course, is the voice of reason that will basically show the main thesis and tell the clones to trust each other and get along, as that's going to be especially important after Order 66. I think the next arc should be a regular mission that then bleeds into Order 66 in the final episode of the second arc. Then the third and final arc of the season will be about how they are dealing with Order 66, and that will set up season 2. The first season won't be as exciting, as it's mainly going to be doing some world building and doing some setup for the clones after Order 66. The show will also use somewhat frequent uses of flashbacks of the Clone Wars to get into the origins of what made the Bad Batch the Bad Batch. So it will have some Clone Wars elements and then move forward with a world post-Order 66 where they fight their own clone trooper brothers and a fresh Darth Vader. I also think it's just a really cool idea to have Darth Vader using clone troopers, as that's just such a menacing threat, and it really connects the prequel era with the original trilogy. The main goal and themes of the show is to find meaning in a world that you don't necessarily understand, and that world doesn't necessarily understand you. And it ultimately to learn to love the ones around you and accept them even though you're kinda dysfunctional as a unit. It'll be comedic, deep, and mostly in the vein of the Clone Wars. It'll utilize Darth Vader as a recurring villain but not the main one, so kinda like Rebels, but except he'll actually appear throughout the series. So that'll be about it for my pitch for the up-and-coming Bad Batch series that will premiere sometime in 2021 on Disney+. Did you guys like what I pitched? Do you have your own idea of how the show will go? I'd love to know your opinions down in the comments, and with all that being said, please remember to leave a like and even consider subscribing. Peace.